National Institute of Mental Health found in 2021 that about 21 million American adults aged 18 and up had at least one episode of major depression. 21 million people make up 8.3% of all adults in the United States. For American adolescents, about 5 million aged 12 to 17 by the year 2021 had at least one episode of major depression. In both adults and adolescents from the United States, the prevalence of a major depressive episode was higher among females than males and higher among those reporting being of two or more races. Depression is characterized by low mood and lack of interest or motivation. Symptoms include behavior changes such as inattention or decreased productivity. Emotional symptoms can range from mild to severe, like feelings of hopelessness and/or thoughts of self-harm and suicide. Physical symptoms of depression include disturbed sleep, energy levels, or eating habits. Pains and aches may also occur. Remember, this video is for educational purposes, not diagnostical. Please see a licensed professional if you think you may have a depressive disorder. Bipolar disorder, previously known as manic depression, is also a major problem in the United States and other populations. In the United States alone, the National Institute of Mental Health found that about 2.8% of adults had bipolar disorder in the past year, while about 4.4% of adults experienced the mental illness at some point in their lives. About 82.9% of people with bipolar disorder experience a great degree of serious impairment in which they could not function properly in their day-to-day lives. The prevalence of bipolar disorder in the past year is similar for males and females. As previously mentioned, please visit a licensed professional if you think you or someone close to you may have bipolar disorder. It is commonly joked about that people who change moods easily are bipolar. Plenty of education and training is required to properly diagnose serious mental illnesses. Bipolar disorder is characterized by drastic shifts in mood, energy, and activity. The Diagnostical and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM-5, states the criteria for being diagnosed with bipolar disorder as having had at least one manic or hypomanic episode, along with a depressive episode. Type 1 bipolar disorder is represented by mainly mania with some depression, while type 2 bipolar disorder is represented by depression with some mania or hypomania, having had at least one manic or hypomanic episode. This is a list of examples of what a manic or depressive episode could look like in people with bipolar disorder, which goes to show that the mental illness is not simply mood swings, but mood swings are a common symptom. People with bipolar disorder may also experience hallucinations and delusions. It is unfortunate to note that suicidal ideation is rampant among people with depression and bipolar disorder. A brief message about suicide awareness. It is safer to openly talk about suicide than it is to omit the subject. If you or someone you know is struggling, please don't hesitate to reach out. Resources are available and help is possible. This coloring book is extremely helpful for learning the anatomy of your brain and to also better understand its mental capacities. We will focus on the bottom left colored brain to learn about the 4 brain lobes and a little about how depression and bipolar disorder manifest. Blue is for the frontal lobe, green is for the temporal lobe, yellow is for the parietal lobe, and red is for the occipital lobe. Now, depression and bipolar disorder do not only happen in one area of the brain. Perhaps arguably the most important lobes to discuss when considering depression and bipolar disorder are the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes. In Zhang and colleagues' research called Brain Structure Alterations in Depression, Psychoradiological Evidence, they review how over the years, neuroimaging, specifically magnetic resonance imaging or MRI, has shown brain changes in people with major depressive disorder. It is stated that the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, thalamus, caudate, pallidum, putamen, and the hippocampus and amygdala of the temporal lobes have several regional gray matter changes identified by MRI. The significance of gray matter changes in depression are that it affects how one functions in everyday life. Described in a journal article by Science Daily, gray matter consists of information processing centers in the brain, while white matter represents the networking of or connections between these processing centers. Back to the different lobes. In bipolar disorder, the prefrontal cortex of the frontal lobe has decreased gray matter, as well as structures in the medial temporal lobe like the hippocampus and amygdala. Why is learning this important to aid depression and bipolar disorder? Neurofeedback is a type of therapy that targets specific areas of the brain to enhance or inhibit frequencies. The specific brain areas previously discussed, like the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes, may be targeted for treatment of one's depression or bipolar disorder. If one with major depressive disorder or some other form of depression decides to do neurofeedback therapy, some helpful protocols according to these research papers include training the beta brainwave at F3 site with alpha and/or theta at PZ site. Training the alpha brainwave at F3 and F4 sites. If one with bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 disorder decides to do neurofeedback therapy, some helpful protocols according to these research papers include training the alpha brainwave at either F3, FZ, F4, C3, C4, or PZ sites. These areas will help with managing the symptoms of depression or bipolar disorder and are only a few examples of combinations of neurofeedback protocols that may work. Please consider discussing a personalized protocol with your neurofeedback specialist.